Hey friends, welcome to the Seminary podcast. So glad that you have decided to tune in. You know, the subtitle of our podcast is Stuff You Wish They Taught in Seminary. And today I wish there was like a big underline under that word wish. I wish this conversation was a robust conversation when I was in school. Today, we're listening in on 4 senior leaders talking about really stuff that was going on the inside when nobody was watching. This is a good time of year for you and I as executive leaders to pull back and to think deeply about the kind of structures we're building as an organization that really create a flourishing environment for our people. You know, we asked earlier in the year what your greatest fears were for this year, and 24.8% of you indicated that staff health, structure, morale, succession were your top fear this year. And so today's conversation, what we're doing is listening in on 4 senior pastors who get really honest on the show about what was happening on the inside of them. One of the churches that I was an executive pastor at, about a decade after I left, the senior leader made tragic decisions in their own personal life that ended up burning the church down, literally to the place where that organization doesn't exist anymore. And from my understanding, actually, the building is going to be demolished. Literally, there's nothing left. A ministry that impacted tens of thousands of people doesn't exist today because of the decisions of a senior leader. And so at this time of year, in the summertime, I want to challenge us to listen carefully to some leaders that have been through some horrific moments and have come out the other side more healthy. And I want us to learn from these moments and say, hey, what can we do to structure our ministry so that we can be the healthiest possible environments we can possibly be? So up first, we've got Bob Reedy at Church of the Open Door, who hit a wall on a Sunday morning a few years ago, and he learned about ungrieved losses that took 40 years of ministry to see. So let's listen into Bob and see what you and I can learn as we think about the future.
I really do think that loss, and especially not properly processing and grieving loss, was a big part of what was behind all of this. In 2018, I lost my brother, my younger brother, who was, really my wingman in so many ways. That was a loss that, I think in some ways I'm still wrestling with. During the pandemic, we lost, pick a number, a lot of loss as far as, attendance and stuff. At first, we were off for, about 4 months. But then when we came back, people began to trickle in. And it was clear to me that we lost hundreds of people as well from our church during that time. That was probably a profound thing for me. We lost some key staff members as well during that time. I lost some friends because of the politics and some of the difficulty of that. And so I think loss was a big part of that. My counselors really helped me a lot with that, not properly grieving loss. Terry Wardle is one who said that ministry is a series of ungrieved losses. And I found that I really wasn't doing that good. I was shaking it off and just moving forward, shaking it off and moving forward, and not really grieving it and bringing God into it and surrendering it to Him. And I think part of what happened with that as well was I was concerned about what people thought, we were, this powerhouse of a church growing like crazy. And all of a sudden, like every other church, we were struggling. And I remember the day that, I burned out. That afternoon, my children all came to our apartment. My wife and I were living downtown. And my daughter reminded me of this the other day. And she said, Dad, do you know what you said to me that day? And I said, no. She said, Dad, you said to me, what are people going to think of me that this happened to me? And that was a loss that I wasn't able to really properly wrap my head around. Right. And I was more concerned about how this was going to look with me as, a Christian leader in our community. And then I think one of the places that the anxiety came from as well was shame. Like, one of the things the enemy, I think, came after me with was like, you've been telling people here in York how to live for the last 15 years, and you let this happen to you.
Wow.
And wow, I wrestled with that as well. And so I think, that loss and worrying what people were concerned about or what they were thinking of me. And then the shame of wrestling through that as a senior pastor, whose church had been top 100 churches,
Right.
I mean, I taught church leadership and biblical preaching at Lancaster Bible College. And this happened to me. And so I really wrestled with, just the fallout of all that.
What are people going to think? Man, Bob's daughter quoting him back to him is a part of this thing I just will not shake. Ungrieved loss, it compounds. Loss is a part of your role. It's a part of my role. But what Bob learned the hard way is that shaking it off and just kind of moving on will cost you more in the long run than sitting with it and processing it. Charles Stone is up next. He's a friend, a pastor, a counselor, and did his PhD on stress while he got diagnosed with 3 serious conditions in the same year. And we're going to focus on an easy kind of habit that he has installed or practice that he has installed that I think you could use in the midst of your processing of dealing with even those kinds of ungrieved losses. Let's listen in on what Charles has to say today.
Well, I kind of get thematically. One involves how we breathe. These are practices that can help us develop resilience. One has to do with how we breathe. 2 have to deal with our emotions. One has to do with our thinking. One has to do with contemplative practices, spiritual practices. One has to do with something called certainty. One has to do with gratitude. One has to do with relationships. And one has to do with sleep. So any of those, I'm game for any of those that you feel like we ought to touch on 1 or 2 of them.
Well, what about maybe breathing? Why don't we start right at the top where you started? And then we'll scratch the surface. There's a ton we obviously we want people to pick up a copy of the book, but maybe start with breathing. That might be kind of interesting.
Yep. Well, actually, this ended up being the first one because it's very easy to do. Now, I think around 75 times plus, you'll find the word breath or breathe in Scripture. In Genesis, God breathed into Adam; he became a living being. I think his early part of Acts, Jesus breathed on the early church; the Holy Spirit came. And then David, the psalmist, wrote, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord." Now, here is the interesting neuroscience insight. Deep breathing activates a key set of nerves that come directly from my brain. It doesn't come from my spinal cord, but these are key nerves. They're in pairs. One of them is called the vagus nerve. It comes from the word vagrant. What does the vagrant do? He wanders around. So this nerve wanders around our hollow organs, our heart, our lungs, our stomachs. There's a lot of communication back and forth. Scientists have found that deep breathing, especially on the exhale, when you exhale a little longer, it actually engages this nerve, which lowers the stress response. And here's why you practice it. Call it the sniff breath. Now, the actual term is a psychological side, but here's how it would work. When you're facing some stress, just breathe in, full lungs of air, then a little more, hold it a second or 2, and then breathe out through your mouth. Now, on the out breath, you want to be a little longer than the in breath. Doing that 3 or 4 or 5 times, labs all around the country found it lowers the stress response. So that is a simple, portable tool you can take, anybody can use. Anywhere. So yeah.
I love Charles. He's such a practical leader. Listen, I'd pick one of those practices this week and really try to install it. I love that he started with breath work because it's really the easiest one to start with. You can install it today. Literally, he gave you everything you need, but maybe look at the other ones, pick up his book, Stress Less. Got a bunch in there. Well, coming up next, we've got Alan Holmes. He's been the senior pastor at Definition Church in Greensboro for 25 years. He has watched gifted leaders crash long enough that he's built a framework around this to understand it. Let's listen in to what Alan has to bring to this conversation.
It's interesting one of the other real key moments for me is I went back to do my doctorate of ministry degree at Gordon Conwell in redemptive leadership. And so much of what we were studying is how God works in the crisis in these pressure moments to, expose the unfinished places in our character so that we can grow and become more like Jesus, and therefore maximize our kingdom impact in the world. And one of my professors, Dr. Powers, he actually wrote a book called Redemptive Leadership. It's a simple little book, but profound, where he describes leadership development in 5 stages. And stage 1 is a skilled leader, where you get a leadership role just based on your skill. So maybe the ability to preach. And so they call you to be the pastor. That's how I became the pastor of my first church. I could preach. I hadn't done anything else, but they let me be the pastor because I could preach. And then the second stage is a principal leader, where you begin to understand why you do what you do. But the third stage, which is so important, is the character stage. And in order for a leader to go through the character stage, God always uses a crisis to bring him into that stage. But when he comes into that stage, he has a choice. In that stage, he can open his heart and allow God to do that deeper work, or he can go back and hide behind his skills and principle. And that's what pastors do a lot of times. The reason you see this turnover every, depending on what statistic you read, every 2 to 4 years, pastors are leaving churches, is because they come into a church and they have this honeymoon season. And then all of a sudden there's a crisis that exposes some things, and they start floating their resume and hiding behind their skill rather than allowing God to deal with their character so that they can advance and become a transformative, redemptive leader. So I think one of the things that's been so true for us is we've just tried to say to people, when there's a crisis, don't panic, don't run away, see it as an opportunity. Right. In fact, I ended up doing my dissertation on the idea that if we could teach this model to leaders, that it would cause them to respond differently in the crisis. Instead of running from it, they would run to it and open their heart, and God could use that to really propel them into their redemptive future. And the research said that was true. And so we've tried to really work that in our culture to understand, when something goes wrong, don't run away and don't hide. Right. Let's run into it and trust God to meet us there, so that this thing, God works redemptively to use it for your benefit and to launch you into your future. And because that's been our culture, people have stuck around. I mean, my lead team, Rick, has been here 25 years. He's actually here 2 Sundays longer than I've been here. Eric's been here 24 years. Jonathan's been here 19 years. Chelsea's been here almost this year will be 14 years. Steve's been here 10 years. I mean, so they've just been here a long, long, long time. But that's why, is that they've seen these moments and we've helped them to find God in it, so that it actually works for us instead of against us.
Alan walked us through the 5 stages. The third one he talked about is character. And that's really where I think you and I, our greatest test is at. And this is where we meet our crisis. You should go back and listen to Alan's episode. Super helpful. Coming up next for our last part of the conversation today is a friend of mine, Scott Landry. He's the senior pastor of The Bridge near Ottawa. He's been on the podcast before. Next is a clip from a book that was coming out, or that has come out, called The Fight. And it's the moment that he lost everything and that he was alone in a house in the Northwest Territory. The reason why I wanted this on is because I think Scott models for you and models for me an open transparency with ourselves, with our people. That is something that I think you and I should live with and should think through. How can we be this transparent with the people around us? Heads up, this is a heavy clip, and it's worth every second of your attention to lean in and hear what Scott shares.
I hope that's a powerful moment in the book, because it's genuinely the most powerful moment in my life. And this was kind of at the crescendo of my breaking point. So after my marriage and my life specifically falling apart, and I kind of lived in a place of isolation. I was living in the Canadian North, and I was lost. I was angry. Like, I had so much anger, and it was So yeah, I talk about it in the book, and I was angry, and ultimately I was angry at myself, but I was also angry at God. And because even after, again, making a mess of my own life, like he didn't make a mess of my life. Nobody made the mess of my life. I made the mess in my life. But then after that, I was trying to do everything right. And I was trying to, do the right thing. And I was like, God, when are you going to start intervening on my behalf? And so, being the preacher that I am, I was like, I got all the Bible verses that tell me that you're going to, like, you're going to do the redemptive thing. You're going to show up, you're going to move, you're going to fix, you're going to redeem, you're going to restore, you're going to repair, you're going to do all the R words. And nothing was happening. Like it was
right.
like, and it was almost as if I literally heard nothing. And I'd like to say I didn't feel anything, but I did. It was just this anger that was welling up inside of me like a pot boiling. And eventually I just became unhinged. Like I was alone and I was completely isolated. I was in this, empty house, and I just started crying out, like, and yelling out. And I threw things. I used words I'm ashamed to admit I used. Like, I mean, I was as unhinged as could possibly. I was like, if I saw you face to face, I would give you the thing. Like, I told him all this stuff. And what I found in that moment was like, I talk about it in the book, but like I yelled, God, I don't even believe in you anymore. I'm done. Like I don't believe you've promised me that you would never leave me. You would never forsake me. And that's exactly what you've done. I've told people that you would never leave them and forsake them. And yet you've done that to me. You are dead to me. I don't believe in you anymore. And even now I still feel this when I'm just talking about it, but like, this is, I know some people are going to roll their eyes at this, but like genuinely, when I heard myself say that, I felt this like over me, over my house. It was like this eerie, like pause. And I heard, as if I've ever heard the voice of God, I heard a voice say, well, then who are you yelling at? And it was like this, like,
Beautiful.
And in that moment, it was like my anger was, it wasn't my degree. It wasn't my Bible. It was my anger was my evidence that God was present right then and right there. And because my anger was directed at him, and he knew that I was angry with him, and he met me at the place of my anger, and he was waiting. And this is the part that I can't do this, what's in my head and in my heart justice, but it was God was saying, I've been waiting for you at this place your whole life.
Wow.
You have been hiding from this anger from your childhood, from your young adulthood. And I've been waiting for you to meet me here at your anger. And I've wanted you to know that I would be here waiting for you. And if you met me on the top of the tallest mountain, and if you look me face to face, and if you were to give me the finger, you would find me there waiting, because I am waiting at who you really are, not who you're pretending to be. And everyone around you, you've got them fooled, and you're a used car salesman, and you can spin the Bible verses and you can do all that other stuff. But I know who you really are. And I'm waiting for you to finally be honest with yourself about who you really are. And now that you finally are, now we can do something about that together. And that was the moment that God truly revealed himself to me. And that's when I, for the first time in my life, truly discovered who I was. And yeah, that's the moment that I hope anybody who ever meets me or talks to me or listens to me or reads in it, like, that's the part that I long for people to have before it costs them like it cost me.
I love that moment when Scott's said he heard, who are you yelling at? Man, that sticks with you. Listen, 4 different stories. What I'm trying to do is raise for you the question about the inner life of what's going on at your church with the senior leaders around you. What if you were to go back and look at these 4 conversations and maybe say, okay, this one might be the best for us to lead a conversation with, and send your team one of those episodes and say, hey, I'd love for us to take some time this summer. Maybe you go and relax on a back deck somewhere, or jump in somebody's boat, or spend a little extra time at the office, because there is a little bit of slack at this time of year, and ask the question, hey, what's going on the inside of us as leaders at the church? How are we developing, and how could this conversation help us ask some different questions than we normally do in our team meetings? All the links to those 4 conversations are down below. Thanks for sticking through this entire conversation. I know there was a lot today, but we'll see you next week with our regularly scheduled programs, kind of back to what we normally do here at Unseminary. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. Thanks for doing what you're doing, including the hard work of the inner life to lead your people in a way that makes a huge difference. Thanks for being engaged in the local church. Take care, friends.